So this is meant to be where we would, in class, play a game in which you would get divided up into teams, and you'd be firms, and you would choose how much output to produce, and we see what happens to your profits over time. Obviously that's not practically possible anymore, so what I'm going to do is just give you an illustration of what tends to happen in these kinds of games that would be played in class. And it's not as entertaining, but you know, it's better than nothing, and maybe you'll learn something out of it, fingers crossed. So in this game what we do is we have 4 firms. They're teams, but 4 firms, and each firm has to choose how much output to produce, and the amount of output produced by all 4 firms together determines the price of the product that they're selling. But these 4 firms, we might start off with them operating together to figure out what would be the best option for the group, and then we could say, well, now you can operate independently, you can be freewheelers, and you decide by yourself how much each team or firm is going to produce without communicating with any of the other teams. So each firm let's say there's 4 of them, each firm is producing exactly the same product as every other firm. There's no product differentiation and there's no marketing. The only choice you can make is how much to produce. The market will then dictate what's the price that consumers are going to be willing to pay for that output produced by all of the teams when you add up their choices of output decisions. So what we'll look at now is a market demand curve that all the firms face, and the average and marginal costs of each firm. So here we see the industry demand curve, and this is telling us the prices that consumers are willing and able to pay for various amounts of output produced by the 4 firms. If the 4 firms were to produce 40 units of output, then the price consumers would be willing to pay for that would be $160. If the quantity produced were 110, then the price would be 90, and so on. The blue line is telling us about the average and marginal costs. So the average cost is the cost per unit of output, and that has been fixed at $40. Similarly, the marginal cost of each additional increment of output, so the 30th unit, the 60th unit, the 100th unit, and so on, is also $40. So this is true for each of the 4 firms, and therefore is also true for the market as a whole. Okay, so part of our answer here is going to be looking at the optimal output for the firms. So if we're thinking about the industry as a whole, that is all 4 firms acting as if they were one big firm, we need a marginal revenue curve for this imaginary or as if monopoly. So the marginal revenue curve will be double the slope of the average revenue curve, and we can see that that's the case there. So first we want to say, what's the break-even output? Well, break-even is the quantity where the price per unit equals the cost per unit, or the average cost. So that's the intersection of the demand curve, telling us the prices consumers are willing to pay, and the average cost curve. So all the firms together would break even if they were producing collectively 160 units of output. So that means each firm would be producing 40 units of output. What about the profit maximizing quantity. Well, that's where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. So where's that? That's the intersection of the marginal revenue curve and the marginal cost curve, which is also the average cost curve. Here. So the profit maximizing output is going to be 80. And we can go on from that to say, well, we also know what the price is going to be. So if at the profit maximizing output, each firm would be producing 20 units of output. That is, collectively, they restrict output from 40 units each to 20 units each in order to maximize their profit. And we can see there that the price that the consumers would be paying for this limited amount of output would be $120 per unit. So we can calculate the total profit for the industry as a whole. It's going to be the price per unit minus the cost per unit. That gives us the profit per unit times the total amount of output. So that's 120 minus 40 times the output of 80. So that's $6,400 profit for the industry as a whole. And then we could divide it up between the 4 firms. That's $1,600 per firm. So far, so good. That would be the outcome if the firms cooperated or colluded to act as if they were one big monopoly. Okay, so in this scenario, we've got 3 of the firms producing 20 units of output, and then one of them decides to produce 30 units of output. So that means the overall industry output is going to be 90 here. We can then easily see what the market price will be. It'll be $110 per unit, and the average cost is, well, that's always going to be the same. It's $40 per unit. So you can immediately see that the firms are making profit per unit. Now, if we think about for each individual firm's profit, it's going to be the price charged minus the cost per unit for each firm, multiplied by the quantity produced by an individual firm. So we know for firms 1, 2, and 3, their profit is going to be $1,400. That is, $110 minus $40 gives us the $70 per unit profit multiplied by the 20 units of output produced by each of these firms. But what about the 4th firm which broke away? Well, it's going to be facing the same price as everyone else, $110, minus the cost, same as everyone else, $40. But they're producing a bit more than everyone else, 30 units. So now when we calculate this firm's profit, it's $2,100. What we notice here, and what the 4th firm, and presumably the other firms might notice as well, is that the 4th firm has been able to make a larger profit than the other 3 firms. In fact, the other 3 firms are now making less profit than they were before when everyone was colluding. The 4th firm, by breaking away and producing more, has been able to generate a larger profit than they would have otherwise been able to do. And not only that, it's caused a decrease in the profit of the other 3 firms. So now we've got a situation where one of the firms which was previously producing 20 units has figured out that if they produce more than everyone else, they'll be able to make a larger profit than everyone else. So one of those 3, which was initially producing 20, now produces 40. What's the total output for the industry going to be? Well, the first 2 firms are still producing 20 units. One of them is producing 30, and now this additional breakaway firm has decided to produce 40. So that's 110 units of output. And now we can, using the graphs, we can see what the price per unit and the average cost per unit is going to be at that output. The market price is now going to be $90 per unit. The average cost is the same. So what's the individual profit of the first 2 firms? Well, it's the price minus the average cost, so $50 per unit profit, times the 20 units that the first two firms are producing each. So that's $1,000 profit each for the first two firms. The third firm is now producing 30 units of output. It's getting $50 profit per unit, so that's $1,500. The fourth firm, the one that's broken away even further, is producing 40 units of output, getting $50 per unit profit, so that's $2,000 profit for this firm. Its strategy worked. It's now making a larger profit than it was before, but the other two firms are now making lower profits than they were before because of the decision of this firm to massively increase its output, which therefore lowers the price that everyone's getting. Alright, so now we're in a situation where they all produced 40 units of output. That's 160 units in total. Where's the output now? 160. The price is now $40 per unit, and the average cost, as before, is $40 per unit. So how much profit does each firm make in this case? Well, price per unit minus cost per unit gives you profit per unit of 0, multiplied by each firm producing 40 is obviously still 0 profit. Each of the firms, in their endeavour to make a larger profit than their rivals, ends up making no profit. So, what are we meant to learn from this game that we've illustrated here? Well, a kind of a standard lesson which might be taught from this is that even if you have an oligopolistic market in which there are a few players of equal size and capacity, that therefore have the opportunity to collude with each other, nonetheless, there's always an incentive to cheat on that agreement, to effectively break that agreement, because there's an opportunity to make profit by breaking away from the others who have stuck to the agreement. And once that occurs, the agreement falls apart and everyone will start competing with each other. In the game we saw that all of the firms end up charging the lowest price they can and producing the largest quantity they can as a group. That is, they all end up making 0 economic profit. Much like in a competitive environment, despite the fact that there's only a few firms in the market. A famous Austrian-American economist named Joseph Schumpeter actually claimed that this was a reason why there was no need to worry about legislating against collusive agreements or cartels. That is, he didn't see the need for what in the United States is called antitrust law, for precisely the reason that I just outlined, that in the long run, all collusive agreements break down. Firms are always going to be competing with each other. He actually had other claims to make, that what was more important than price competition between large firms was really competition with respect to innovation, technological innovation, product innovation, management innovation, and so on, that enabled firms to develop new ways of producing goods, new types of goods, which destroyed the older methods and the older kinds of products, and perhaps even older firms. So, nonetheless, there's a rival view which says that collusive agreements won't necessarily break down at all, especially when it's a few large players who are of roughly equal size and are producing very, very similar kinds of products to each other. For them, they're playing a game that, in a sense, lasts forever. It can last well beyond the lifetimes of anyone who happens to be employed by the company. So, in that case, these large firms really have a long-run choice between two options. They can either engage in an endless zero profit, cutthroat price war, or they can realize that that's not necessary, that rather they can all implicitly agree, that is, they all understand that it's in the interests of themselves to not engage in this kind of price competition, so that everyone can end up making monopoly-like profits for decades and decades. That would be the alternative view. I think we can probably find a middle ground between the two of them. We know that implicit and explicit collusion, the difference between implicit and explicit is simply that all the participants realize what's in the interests of themselves and their potential rivals or colluders, and simply act accordingly. Explicit collusion is where they literally get together and actually hammer out an agreement. They communicate with each other. An actual agreement. Anyway, so we know that implicit and explicit collusion does in fact exist in the real world. But we also know that collusive agreements do break down in the real world as well. That titans do in fact clash and compete with each other in an effort to steal market share, to destroy their competitors. But really, it's as to which it will be, whether you will see collusion or competition in oligopolistic markets, depends very much on the particular circumstances of that market at any given time. Unanticipated changes that just fall from the sky, like a coronavirus, for example, or secretly planned changes by a particular company, can change the nature of the game. If an exploitable weakness emerges or certain advantages emerge, then profit-driven firms will change their strategies to take advantage of that situation. They will either start to engage in collusive behavior, or they will start to engage in competitive and even predatory behavior. So it really depends on the particular circumstances as to what kind of behavior emerges. There's not overall a general theoretical framework which we can use to accurately predict what will happen in any given case. You have to look at the concrete particular facts of the situation. Alright, that'll do for me. Have a good time for the rest of your studying.